According to the survey that tracks emerging risks across South Africa, farmers highlighted infrastructure degradation, a widening skills gap, and high input costs, among other concerns facing the agricultural sector.
Initially, it started off with the more effective, efficient use of inputs. You know, you do precision farming and take it from there. But now, with what we have in terms of access to weather data, and then the forecast in terms of what might come your way, in terms of, say, for instance, extreme cold, then the farmers in the Karoo know they must take care of the sheep.
The survey states that 64% of agricultural businesses rank climate volatility as their top concern. In order to mitigate the risks, farmers have had to take out costly insurance policies to protect their infrastructure, farming equipment, and even their crops. Climate volatility also shines a light on the issue of decreasing water availability for agriculture.
We've got to find between now and maybe 2032, we've got to somehow find 300 million liters of water to add to our current store. The city's growing fast, the demand is rising equally, and I think there is certainly, we're in a long-term challenge here.
For now, many agricultural businesses have begun to diversify their operations in order to mitigate the risks associated with climate volatility so that the businesses can survive. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
So then increasingly adverse weather shocks like the worst drought in 40 years, which hit parts of Southern Africa last year, those are just one among multiple problems facing Africa's farmers. Let's take a look at the big picture issues with Jennifer Barnes. She's the head of partnerships at AGRA, that's the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. She's joining us live on the program tonight. Thank you for your time this evening. So in this report, AGRA is pointing out that, intra-African trade in food products is around 20% compared to roughly 60% in Europe. What's holding back agriculture trade flows on the continent?
Hi, good evening. So there are several things that are actually holding back intra-regional trade. First are trade and non-trade barriers. We see it across the continent. Think about some of the import tariffs that were held against Tanzanian and Kenyan maize, but also non-tariff barriers. We've seen the milk challenges between Uganda and Kenya. In addition to that, of course, we have poor infrastructure, resulting in high food waste, food losses, and food not even arriving at the right places. Another issue is, of course, the political economy and environment. Sometimes ad hoc decisions being made between African countries, often in the same economic or trade union. Lastly, I would like to point out some of the structural challenges that we've seen across the agriculture sector in Africa. Low mechanization rates, low fertilizer usage, challenges in terms of access to finance, all of that combined, it's almost a holistic challenge that farmers and actors along the value chain are being confronted with that is really keeping back intra-regional trade.
Indeed. How much progress could we potentially make in cutting levels of hunger, food affordability, undernutrition, malnutrition, as it were, if countries removed the tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade? Because that ideally is the vision, right, of the continental free trade area.
It's a quite interesting question. And the unfortunate thing is that sometimes we often lack appropriate data, but there have been some scenario plannings and modeling done around that. So on the immediate impact of hunger, we don't have a lot of data, but some of the studies that have been done indicate that we might actually pull out at least 1 million people out of hunger if we address non-trade barriers and trade barriers. However, the impact is not necessarily directly into hunger, it's indirectly. Once we start addressing all of these trade barriers, non-tariff and tariff barriers, what we're seeing is that we see a significant increase in real income, and that is the indirect impact that it will have on malnourishment, nutrition across the continent. So it's basically a story that is not one-sided. It's not about hunger directly, it's also about income. And those are almost two sides of the same coin. If you address one, we have a better chance of addressing the other. Food security is about availability. It is about the appropriate type of food and the volume, but it's definitely also about affordability.
Adverse weather events like the drought that devastated harvests in Zambia and Zimbabwe last year, they're becoming increasingly more common, and when they do occur, they're much more severe. What can insurance companies do to try and mitigate that damage to crop yields and farmer incomes? Are there examples we can point out from different parts of the continent where there's some interesting insurance programs that have potential to scale?
Yes, definitely. And I think the insurance schemes and programs that we're building really need to be tailored to the challenges that we see across the African food system, right? The level of fragmentation, the lack of resilience when it comes to climate change, and just the lack of data in general that makes it cumbersome to serve such a wide and diverse group of agriculture producers. So what is it that insurance can do? So I think first of all, for example, build parametric index products using weather, satellite, or aerial indexes. That really helps against the meticulous job of actually going to wide number of farmers on farm to determine what losses can be. We know, for example, that Kilimo Salama, which is a collaboration between Acre and Acre Africa, has generated weather index products that use station remote sensing data to trigger payouts to smallholders. So money can get there faster and to a wider number of people. Other things that can also happen is to bundle insurance with credit inputs and advisory services. The bundling makes insurance a lot more affordable, it increases demand, and it protects lenders and input suppliers. And we've seen a special insurance company pull up, partner with several different actors to ensure that farmers receive, for example, insurance in combination with their input loans. And then looking not only at how do you shape insurance products, but also how do you mitigate the risk. So insurance really looks at the transfer of risk, but it doesn't really reduce it. But combining insurance with investments such as water harvesting, introducing drought-tolerant seeds, and improving soil health helps to address almost both the supply and demand side, if I can put it in those type of wording. And we've seen, for example, the World Food Programs, its R for Rural Resilience initiative, has been linking risk reduction work with weather index insurance. And then, of course, digitization, using digital distribution, mobile payments, any type of technology that will help to lower the cost and enhance the scale of the products that we're putting in the market.
Yeah.
And looking from a bigger ecosystem perspective, I would also say partnerships. As somebody who's leading on partnership engagement at AGRA, I have seen the power when governments, sovereign reinsurance, and other actors actually come together, such as, for example, in the African risk capacity, to provide sovereign parametric drought policies and triggering payouts in countries. We've seen that in Zimbabwe, but also other countries. There are a wide range of things that can happen. I think what is critical is that we think once again about a systemic impact that looks at a holistic solution across different factors.
Indeed. One last question for you, because reading the food systems reports that came out in the course of this week, there are two interesting trends that are heading in opposite directions that stood out for me. So on one hand, output of food on the continent, that's been going up by around 4.3% every year since the year 2000. And yet, this is a continent where stunting still affects 1 in 3 children under 5, and undernourishment, especially after 2022, that has gone up. For the reasonable observer, they're going to ask, if we're growing more food on the continent, why are there more of us not getting enough to eat?
It's really astonishing, and I really think we're getting to the heart of the matter now. It's not just about producing. I mentioned earlier as well that across different crops across the continent, we're probably losing 40%. That's almost half of the food that our farmers are producing because of poor infrastructure. Once again, food security is about availability, appropriate food in terms of volume and the value, and also just about affordability. So if we produce food but don't get it to people in time, that's really a big mismatch. Another mismatch is also that we're growing food, often staple crops, but that's not necessarily what is needed. What we need to move to is actually dietary diversity and more nutrient dense food. For example, Nigeria produces plenty of cassava, but child anemia and stunting remains widespread because diets lack iron, zinc, and protein. Another challenge is our rapid population growth. We have made a lot of investments in terms of healthcare, education, etc. We see that translated into growing population, but it's outpacing our nutrition gains. We're not producing enough to feed our growing population. And then really we have to come back to inefficient trade and market access. That's a major contributor to hunger that we still see across the continent. And it's something that we really need to address if we want to see basically nutrition improve. I already mentioned earlier when we spoke about trade barriers. If we address some of these tariff and non-tariff trade barriers, the impact will be on hunger directly, but it will definitely also be on income, and affordability and poverty is really hampering people their access to food. So lastly, I would like to say gender barriers and just unequal distribution of access to food. Despite the fact that our women on this continent are producing most of Africa's food, they have the least access to land, credit, and inputs. So once again, a holistic approach is required by all the different actors who might specialize in different solutions to really put their heads together and work on a bigger picture in terms of improving this.